What a joy to be back with Gregor Larson. You have the longest title, and you are the most humble and just like straightforward, no big deal kind of guy. And I don't know if that's because you were originally American and now you're a fancy person at Oxford University. You're the director of the Paleogenomics and Bio-Archaeology Research Network at the School of Archaeology at Oxford University. So when you go to a dinner party, and people say, oh, of course it's England. They don't say, what do you do? Because that is the most vulgar Americanism. But if an American or a non-Brit was to be there and say, oh, what do you do? How do you describe what you do?
I would say, I mean, if I'm in a, usually I'm in the company of other academics, but in the off chance that I'm
Oh,
not,
right.
where my title is relatively short, actually, compared, because that's the whole thing. I think in any profession, it's you just acquire names and ways of people thinking and talking about you and things that you have to put on business cards and that sort of thing.
Yes, yes, would need a large business card.
Part of the reason for that is it was more of a backronym. We created the Bioarchaeology Research Network so because we wanted the barn. That was the whole point. We had to figure out a way to
Oh,
get the barn.
that's funny. So it's
So we
the
never
barn.
really, we won't refer to the everything. We've just anachronized it or acronized it. Is that a word? Just to become the Paleo Barn,
I
which
like the
is
idea.
different. Yeah.
Oh, I see. So really, I think of you as an orchestra leader, a conductor, an orchestra conductor. Is that a strange thing? Because you gather together, you once said the last time we talked was about cats and their ancient DNA and Egyptian mummies. It was a great conversation. If anyone missed it, you got to go back and listen because Gregor Larson is the man. It's really great stuff. But we talked about the idea that you bring together all these geniuses in other fields and you gather them and you gather their work and then you help get it published and then you publicize it.
Yeah, it's not just me, obviously. We just work in a pretty large team, and there's all lots of Venn diagram networks that are just always bubbling up. And you go to conferences, or a colleague introduces you to somebody, and inevitably you'll find common ground or something interesting that they know that
Right.
you don't, or vice versa. And then it's just a matter then of saying, that could be fun. We should work on that together. Or that's an interesting
Wow.
question. Never thought about that. Let's use that data set to approach that. So, yeah,
Wow.
and that's what I love about what I do is I think in Hollywood you tend to get this kind of lone scientist that we just watched The Martian the other night, and it's easier to tell a story if there's one person you can attribute something to, or a very small
Yes.
group of people.
Yes.
The reality, of course, is that all science works with thousands or tens of thousands
Yes.
of people who are
Yes.
lots of people who are contributing lots of different things, even to projects that are not even certain are going to take up their data later on to do something else with. So it's harder to tell that story, but that's the way that we work.
So in fact, those Hollywood stories are somewhat bogus. It wasn't just Einstein,
Surprise. But
Einstein,
it's
a
great
surprise
storytelling, right?
storytelling, but more interesting is the life that you lead of coming upon ideas, particularly that have to do with archaeology, and in the case of this show, animals,
Hmm.
and looking back and then looking forward and what happened then and how does it affect now. And in particular, a paper that your barn sent out the barn door about German Shepherd dogs and their background and wolves. So I think that I could be wrong that some New York Times or Wall Street Journal was like, is there a wolf in your Chihuahua? But that really is not the point of this paper. This paper is specifically that German Shepherd dogs are fairly inbred, not to and to their detriment.
All breed dogs to a degree, to a greater and lesser degree, have a great less amount of genetic variability within the breed than populations that have not gone through that breeding process that kicks off in the mid 19th century in the UK and then becomes a real fad. And now there's within dogs, there's probably 400 or so, depending on who you
That's
talk to.
right. That's right.
And the reason, and it makes a lot of sense that you would have reduced variability because one of the rules of a breed is that you're not allowed to have sex with something that's not that breed, right? So you immediately have a closed set of
Yes.
variability,
Yes.
and that only gets winnowed down through increasing repetition of one popular sire, as it were, that is, which is true in this case, or one or two animals contributing to a whole lot of puppies, but not a whole lot of everybody else. And that just, and if you're not introducing new variability from time to time, if you're not having an open breeding process, which is what more or less the human population, those are most wild populations, then
Right.
you're going to get that reduction in variability. And the reduction in variability then can lead to issues genetically because you end up with a lot of recessive traits that then show up, or you end up with mutations that wouldn't be in the larger population. And those can be detrimental, but it can also be because very often we define the breeds based upon a particular shape or quality about them. And those qualities are not always the healthiest ones. Like,
We're going, but disregarding digestive system or respiratory system or
and we rarely take into account the fact that if you're selecting for one thing that you consider pretty or interesting or unique, that it is likely, because of the way the genetic code works, linked to something else. So that white horses
right,
eventually will all develop night blindness. That's just how that works, right?
and skin cancer.
And skin cancer. Or I was reading a fair bit today about these hairless cats. And then, of course, you're not going to see that in the wild so much, but people really like novelty. And so, like, ooh, let's breed a hairless cat. And now those hairless cats, they have trouble keeping warm, shocker. They are prone to suns that you have to put sunscreen on because they get burned. And so, yeah, they might look really strange and interesting, and it might be worth creating a breed. And there are multiple breeds now of hairless cats, but it's not the sort of thing that would necessarily be healthy for any individual within that breed.
And hairless dog, whose
True.
name I cannot pronounce. It's XOXO.
Yeah, I think for shorthand, most people just say Xolo. I
Oh,
think you
you
can
knew
go a little
that.
bit further and say Xolo Quinte or something. Yeah,
Cool. You said more of it than I could. They were Aztec or Mayan or something.
that's right.
Really
Yeah.
fascinating. So the German Shepherd dog, and this paper followed the also wolf and dog and shepherd co-breeding, and that's really interesting because a lot of people are stuck back on this idea that dogs originally were wolves. And the more tame wolves that hung around the fireside, as it were, or the cave, then morphed into dogs, maybe in the way you're talking about. Their more timidity made them less wolf-like in appearance or behavior. But that's not the case, is it?
Nobody really knows the process. It's difficult. What we do know, though, is that we now have a circumstance where you have very clear wolves and very clear dogs, and they so much about their physiology, about their behavior, about their looks. Everything is really radically different between those two populations. Which, though, of course, dogs come from wolves, they are now, you could even refer to them as a different species just because of how many changes they've gone through in association with us. And what's also true is that within wild populations or where you have dogs and wolves occasionally interbreeding, you almost never see in any sort of circumstance in which people are deliberately creating them and then maintaining them, circumstances where you have a dog with a lot of wolf genomics or a wolf with a lot of dog genomics. In fact, there are at least, I think, a half dozen or more wolf sanctuaries in the US where animals that are created through this process are kept in these places because they make terrible wolves and they get kicked out of wolf
Right.
packs, and they make terrible dogs because they've got a
Yes.
whole lot of wolfiness in them.
Good.
So they
They're
have this kind of
pariahs.
halfway house for them, which
Yeah.
is just, I don't know, offenders of some kind of the law
Oh,
that dogs and wolves
yes.
shall not interbreed, and yet there they are. And so people look after them and take care of them, but they really are, they're bad on either side of that equation, except for the fact that it's really interesting that when you go both in sort of modern terms as well as historically, and even going back to some Roman texts that we found, people really love bragging about the idea that there is wolf in their dog.
Yes.
And it's
Isn't
just
that
constantly.
something? And the bigger the dog and the more wolf-like in appearance, and there's a lot of breeds you could say are wolf-like, whether even it's huskies, Siberian huskies, or Malamutes, or any of the German Shepherd type or Northern European Dutch Shepherds,
Hmm.
the various kinds of, they got big, heavy coats and they're big and imposing looking. As for whether people should be interbreeding dogs and wolves, for the reason you said, people want something novel. They want something nobody else has. A bigger Harley Davidson kind. That's how I think of a wolf dog hybrid. I want
That's
a really big, mean looking dog.
That's true at the kind of the level of the appearance of it, but there's also something deeper about it. That like it's not, it has to be occupy something wild. Like somehow the domestic component of dog is weakness. And so therefore and it's this kind of, there's a manliness about it. It's just this sketchy
Right.
vibe that if you don't have a bit of wolf in your dog, then it's just a lazy, not very
Yeah.
good. And
Yeah.
what's interesting though is that this was in the sort of late 19th century. There was someone who was determined to put they had a half wolf dog, and they were like, oh, this will put this into our Greenlandic sled dogs because the Greenlandic sled dogs, we don't want them getting too weak. So every so often, we're going to put some wolf in there just to make sure. And they do that. They bring this wolf dog in, and it makes for a terrible sled dog.
Sled
It,
dog. How interesting.
but but not just a terrible sled dog, they make for terrible every kind of dog, right? Whether that's so
Wow.
you have a little bit of wolf in your dog, and even the people who maintain Sarloos or Czechoslovakian wolf dogs, these breeds which do have a significant component of wolf in them and are maintained as such, much. And they pride themselves on the fact that there is a noticeable and significant
Right.
degree of wolf, both genomically and the way that it looks and behaves. You talk to, yes, it's great for them, but this is not a dog that you would just give to a family and be like, oh, here you go. These require a significant greater investment in terms of how you manage this animal, which is not neither wolf nor dog, and that is does not play by the same rules.
That's so interesting. Early on, when I first moved to Vermont, we have a pretty good sized piece of property, not compared to something gigantic, but you can't see any neighbors. There was a sort of house that seemed to be rented out to people at quite a distance, and we had deer fencing all around the property and a gate, but the gate we sometimes left it open depending on the time of day. And my dogs were at the window making the strangest sound I've ever heard, like s- alarming, but not having the courage to go out the dog door to see what it was, a growl. And so I look out the window and there's a wolf, but he's just standing by the back door. And oh, wait a minute, he's wearing a collar with a tag. It's a wolf. I've seen wolves. This is a wolf. I've only seen them in a zoo, actually. I thought, what do I do? Somebody owns this wolf. They put a collar on it and a tag. My dogs are, they know, even through a window, they can tell by the way this animal walks, the way it stands, that it's not a dog.
Mm.
So went out. I thought, am I going to get eaten alive? Wolves aren't supposed to let a human next to them. But this poor dog had obviously been bastardized, as you're talking about, and I read off the tag, and I said, "Guy, just wait out here." And went inside, called the number. Oh, says the neighbor in the rental house. Oh yeah, that's Bucky or something. I said, Bucky's a wolf? Oh, he's a wolf hybrid. Oh, I said, okay. Do you think it's really safe to have him around? Oh, he's always in my truck when I'm on construction jobs. I said, okay, so your dog is in your truck all day. Yep, that's where he's safest. The guy came and got him, and what am I going to do? I'm thinking this is a really lousy life for this creature. He
Yeah.
was very mellow, but I don't know what would happen if you confronted him with a scenario where a wolf would act wolf-like, as in, I don't know, a gazelle's running across, or a deer, or anything.
Mm.
But they're supposedly illegal in a lot of places in the US to own a wolf hybrid.
Yeah. And there's a really interesting space which ethically, legally, genetically, like
Yes,
it's not, it does, the Venn
yes.
diagram does not overlap very nicely there. And there's a whole myriad of different rules about what's okay. What's curious is how you said your dogs were reacting in a really strange manner. I would bet that the actual wolves would react to that animal in the same way as a sort of, it's
Yeah,
other, it's different, it's
it's
not
different.
okay.
It's not okay. There's like an alien creature, and
It's
we
like the
don't want.
uncanny valley, right, of wolf dog.
Yeah.
It's
Yes.
like,
Yeah, I mean, it's not good for them. It's funny, earlier on you said when we were talking about German Shepherd dogs, who have suffered greatly, along with many other breeds, from inbreeding, from being bred for looks, and then many of the things are sacrificed. In the case in the US, the whole hind end slopes down in a way that makes them walk in a completely peculiar gait and have really big hip dysplasia problems.
exactly.
They also have a lot of digestive problems, like IBD-ish kind of problems. And their digestion is horrible for them and for the people. But it was interesting when you talked about there's just this small breeding pool. You can't have sex with anybody outside of your breeding pool, meaning your breed. And I happen to be listening to Philippa Gregory books on audiobooks at the moment, which are all the British, and I don't know if it's real. Is this really how the kings were in 1415 and 1515? I think maybe, but oh my God, you were allowed to have sex and mate with first cousins, practically incest. And isn't that something that's taboo in human society because it weakens, they become hemophiliacs or stupid or crazy or something. Is there any analogy?
Well, there is, but keep in mind that both Darwin and Einstein married their first cousins. So, and we tend to allow them.
I didn't know that.
No, it's true. Uh, but there are general, most societies have a kind of, the closer the relatedness, the less or the more taboo it is to
Yes.
form a kind of a pair bond relationship and have children. But the interesting thing there is that it's not just what you described about the English royal family. Throughout time, with the value of ancient genetics, we've seen that there are very highly esteemed, very wealthy, for the lack of a better word, royal families that existed in the
Yeah.
Neolithic and before and since, where there has been a significant degree of incest. It's almost like it is, and there is a very interesting relationship there to breed. Whereas if you are that important, you don't dare marry a commoner, and which
Right.
means that significantly limits your pool, in which case,
Yeah.
okay, you know.
And so, how have we taken that idea to dog breeding,
Yes.
where I understand that, and this may not be true, but standard poodles, brown chocolate is not a normal color for them. They're either black or white or maybe apricot. They might be party color. I don't know. But I don't think they're supposed to be chocolate because I knew someone who had to have a chocolate standard poodle, only for me to discover the only way to get one, again, I'm just saying this anecdotally, is to have lots of incest
Mm.
of brown standard poodles, of which there were so few to begin with.
But
Yet
that's
that
going to be
dog could,
true of golden retrievers. The first, that
yeah,
was just a handful of puppies. The Selkirk Rex cat with the floppy ear. And a lot of these mutations pop up and are present only in a either in one or a very small handful of individuals. And then you breed from that. You outbreed initially, but you're trying to maintain the trait. So you can increase variability there, but you are starting with a significant bottleneck right away if that's the trait that you really want. And I'm sure going back through time, you'll get the same thing with the kind of Dalmatian spotting or any sort of
right,
really interesting shape of face or head or tail, that sort
or
of
fur or anything.
Or exactly. Yeah, precisely.
So this is what we have a proclivity to do as humans. We just do this.
Yeah,
We
we
can't
do.
help ourselves.
We can't. I think we have this weird, maybe not weird. I'm sure there's some deep psychological reason for it, but we love novelty and we love showing it off and
Oh,
becomes fashion and it's different. And there's that kind of frequency dependent selection again, where if something is hyper rare, it's very important. Or if it's
isn't
the
that
rareness
amazing?
is the money, is the value of it. So,
Yeah.
for purple for a long time, or even now we call vanilla ice cream the boring. Initially, vanilla was really hard to get, right? And that made
Oh,
it
I love
super
it.
tasty, right? If you see something that's highly unusual and you can take ownership, you have a sense of control, and then you're the one who developed this breed. And that's what happened with the hairless cats in the 60s and 70s. And probably and all your breed stories are very similar to this, at least starting in the 50s and 60s. And what's so fun then about German Shepherd is that there was a real effort in the late 19th century to develop it's called the German Shepherd, right? You had to represent all of Germany. So you can
Right.
imagine the sort of power play involved in this. What is it going to look like? What's going to contribute to it? What are we supposed to be exemplifying here? What is the German character that we want to personify in this dog? How is this all going to work? And there were a lot of people who were part of breeding clubs who knew what it was to be around a dog, to breed a dog, to do things with the dog. And they had a lot of ideas for how to do all of this. And what I've been told is that there was at least one guy who was super convinced, and this is not unusual, that there had to be, if it's going to be a German Shepherd, there has to be wolf in this. Wolves are very important in Germany.
Oh,
So he kept insisting, this cannot be a German Shepherd without a wolf in it. And the rest of the breeders were like, we understand dogs and wolves enough to know that's a very bad idea. We don't know.
right.
We want this to be like a
A
dog that
dog.
is,
A
yeah.
dog.
So the story is that, and I need to really find out how absolutely true this is. But the story is that this guy, or the thing that we were semi-testing, was that this guy managed to do this through like smoke and mirrors, right? Like he kind of subterfuge managed to get some wolf into the breed. Then, when the breeders who didn't want this to happen found out about this, they excised the entire line. They went through the whole pedigree, excised any of the dogs that had some wolf in it, and then, even worse, went back to the stud books and redacted all of the history demonstrating that this had actually taken place. So for this study that we've just published, we had museum samples going back to the very early 20th, very late 19th century of German Shepherds that people had given to the Bern Museum and a couple other museums of their German Shepherds going back over 120 years. And we were
You mean
able to get
they gave the
genome.
dead body when
Yeah. So
dog
they
died
would,
and they gave
yeah.
the dog to be studied?
Yeah, to the museum. So the Bern
Ah,
Museum has thousands of dogs of hundreds of breeds and go with a really long time series, which is great because then you can start to really interrogate this question of like how much has the genetic variability decreased over the last 120
right.
years? Or at what genes is this showing up a lot and what is the effect of sires? And then one of the questions that we asked was, is there, it was more by accident than design, were there some of these early German Shepherds, was there any wolf in them? And lo and behold, there's
No kidding.
yeah. So this what gets really fun. So there is all these dogs have really weird fun names. So this dog's name is Lord Quirin, Quirin. And we think the pedigree's not great, but we're pretty certain that its two parents were a dog, and I'm put that in heavy air quotes,
Okay.
Wolfie von Volsnest and Schalk von Volsnest, and their grandmother was an animal called Zamba Sar, which was a wolf. And when
That's
they're
a lot of wolf.
presented, yeah, it's a fair bit. So Lord Quirin ends up being about 20% wolf. And when you look at the records, people had referred to these two dogs, the parents of Lord Quirin, Wolfie von Volsnest and Stralk von Volsnest, as dogs, but their name is Wolfie von Wolfsnest, right? There's a small subtle clue there in the name that this dog would have had a significant ancestry component of wolf. And then we also then discovered, we looked at all the rest of them, and lo and behold, nothing. So this story about how the breed club worked it out and then identified within the pedigree all the dogs that were descended from Lord Quirin and from all the ones that were just above him, and just went zoop, nope, and got rid of them and relatively quickly to ensure that there was no echo of that wolf, which this gentleman who was part of it in the early days managed to very sneakily get into the
Get
German
back
Shepherd
in.
line. So there were German Shepherds, early days, there were 20% wolf.
That's a lot. That was
Yeah.
because of grandma, who was a full-on
Yeah,
wolf.
and some inbreeding, and from mom and dad, both of whom were supposed to be dogs, were written down as dogs, but names belied otherwise.
It's a great story. I
I'm
mean, what
glad.
people do is just so interesting. The golden retriever in America, as I understand it, I'm going to pick a number. Again, I could be so wrong. It was the 1960s, 1970s. There was the world's most gorgeous, apparently,
Right.
golden retriever. He was like the just the pinnacle of gorgeousness. So everybody was related to him. We
Mhm.
bred off of him. You in England did not do that. So it only took maybe 10, 15, maybe 20 years to discover that this gorgeous, magnificent animal was riddled with cancer. So he has passed on a cancer gene, especially to large male Goldens that
Mm.
are all beautiful and full of the most amazing feathering and coat and stuff, and a predilection to cancer, which is devastating. So you'll
Yeah.
find people in the Golden Retriever fancy, if that's the right word, who always say, oh no, this is a British Golden Retriever, because
Right.
the British line looks less glam, if you will, I think, less feathering,
Mm.
maybe more of an industrial strength dog that could actually go out and do something in the field rather than just be a magnet for burrs, and doesn't have the cancer. So that's interesting that going on, this one was so beautiful and then prolifically sired so many other dogs, and that was the
And
gene that got passed. That's a
And we
bad gene.
found exactly the same thing in the German Shepherds. There were like six or so dogs, like best in show dogs, that were over the last 120 years that had a significantly outsized amount effect on subsequent generations, and thereby also limited the amount of genetic variability within all this. And what's fascinating to me is that there's this really interesting tension that I bought a breed book, just like a coffee table book 5, 6 years ago. And I was paging through it, and it struck me on the second or third time I was looking at it, and I just couldn't. I was like, "What's going on? Oh, this is weird." Each page was a big glossy photograph, and it just listed the breed name at the top, and then
Okay.
it used the singular all the way through the description. So it would say a golden retriever is a great family dog. Not golden retrievers are in the
Right.
plural, but each dog type, each breed type was only described in the singular as though it was just a fungible unit. It didn't matter. What you were getting was not just a dog that looked like this, but by implication behaved like this
Right.
and was good in this circumstance and bad in
Yeah.
that circumstance
Yeah.
and had all these interesting traits like very curious or like to be around or whatever it was. Like, but it was always is, and there was zero recognition for the fact that there will be, even within dogs that look virtually identical to one another,
Yes.
huge variability in
Yes.
behavior and some in size and all kinds of other things. And even though we tend to write about them as though it's just a fungible, absolutely rubber stamping, just bam, put them all out
Right.
there, know that, and yet what the popular sire effect is demonstrating, and your story about Goldens, is that it's almost Animal Farm, right? All animals are
Yes.
equal, but some are
Yes.
more equal than others. So yes, all golden
Absolutely.
retrievers might be identical, but this one is the one that everybody wants.
That's
And
right.
now it's so imagine like you went to a store and you saw 10 identical Gucci bags. The Gucci bag itself is the whole point of it is that it's fungible. So if you see it, you can go buy that one. If it's
That's
slightly
right.
different, it's a factory second. And yeah, you want that one, but there's no reason that any one of those would be more attractive than any other. So that's where all the dog breeds get really interesting is that they exemplify both of those ideals simultaneously. They're all virtually identical, but the minor differences between them will have massive downstream effects because you want to be able to say that, oh, mine is descended from this one.
That's
Or
right.
if you then find that it's riddled with cancer, oh, mine is not descended from that one. It
Right.
becomes this kind of real tension. It's just fascinating.
That's an extremely good point. We've run out of time,
Oh, no.
Gregor. Yeah, I know. I can't believe it because you are such a delight to talk to. You're definitely going to have to come back. But there are so many other creatures on the planet that you guys study and think about. And it's good. We should all stop and step back and think. And those of you that got French bulldogs because they were lavender colored, you mentioned the word purple earlier.
Yep.
They got lavender and they spent $5,000 or $6,000 a dog. And those dogs have all kinds of medical problems
Of course they do.
because purple is not really a color in nature. It is wonderful to talk to you. Thank you for being here. Thanks for all the smart and interesting things you do at Oxford.
Thank you, Tracy.
Bye.